She assigned us a 20-page paper on Shakespeare. We wrote it, all of us, in 1 week while juggling every other class we had. 2 months later, she smiled and told us she hadn't graded them yet, and that we wouldn't get them back before the school year ended. She said this like it was completely reasonable. It was not completely reasonable, and I told her so, in front of everyone. And then I walked myself to the principal's office to make sure it stuck. If you ever sat in a classroom watching a teacher do absolutely nothing while expecting everything from you, this story is for you. This is about a 10th grader, a lazy English teacher, a very revealing computer screen, and the most satisfying trip to the principal's office you've ever heard of. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and let's go back to 10th grade English. Let me paint you a picture of this English class. 90% of every period looked exactly the same. The teacher, we'll call her Mrs. B, would arrive, hand out a worksheet, sit down at her desk, and open her computer. From that point forward, her contribution to the educational process was essentially complete. The worksheets were busy work, not interesting, not challenging, not connected to anything we were learning, just pages of fill-in-the-blank and short answer questions designed to occupy 45 minutes, so nobody had to think too hard about what was actually happening at the front of the room. What was actually happening at the front of the room was online shopping. I'm not speculating. I had seen her screen on more than one occasion clothing sites, home goods, the full catalog of a person who had discovered that a classroom full of 10th graders doing quiet worksheets is a pretty good cover for personal browsing time. Now, I want to be honest. For a lot of us, this arrangement was fine. I loved to read. I did well in English without much instruction. Busy work was annoying, but it wasn't hard, and a low-stress period in the middle of a school day has a certain appeal when you're 15. I had made a kind of peace with Mrs. B's approach to her profession. What broke that peace was the essay. In the fall semester, we'd read Hamlet and Mrs. B, in what I can only assume was a brief and uncharacteristic burst of ambition, assigned us a 20-page essay on the play. 20 pages. For 10th graders. Due in 1 week. I want you to understand what that week looked like. We had other classes. We had other homework. We had the general chaos of being 15. And in the middle of all of that, we were each required to produce the longest piece of writing any of us had ever attempted in our academic lives on a deadline, to a specific rubric, with no flexibility on the due date. We did it. Every single one of us handed in that paper on the Monday it was due. I'm not saying it was pleasant. I'm saying we met the deadline because that's what was expected of us, and because Mrs. B had made it clear that the deadline was not negotiable. And then we waited for our grades. February became March. March became April. I had genuinely almost forgotten the essay existed by the time it came up again. We were halfway through April, nearly 2.5 months after the due date, when someone in class asked about it during a conversation about the upcoming final exam. The final was in May. A reasonable person might want to know their current grade before walking into a major test. Mrs. B smiled, completely unbothered, and she explained that she was still working on grading them, but not to worry, she had a system. She had counted out the days between now and the deadline for teachers to submit final grades, which was 1 week after the last day of school. She had divided the remaining papers by the remaining days. She was grading exactly 1 paper per day and would finish right on time. 45 students stared at her. Several people exchanged the specific look that means, did she actually just say that out loud? I could feel something shifting in my chest, that particular combination of disbelief and indignation that happens when someone says something so confidently wrong that your brain needs a moment to process it. She had just told us, cheerfully and without shame, that she had been grading 1 paper per day for 2 months and planned to finish after school ended, meaning we would never see our graded essays or her feedback. Not before the final. Not before grades were submitted. Not at all. I decided to say something. Wait, Mrs. B, did I hear you right? You're saying we won't get our papers back at all because you won't finish grading them until after the last day of classes? Yes, that's right. I took a breath. But we turned them in 2 months ago. Do you not see how that's ridiculous? The smile came down. She got defensive, immediately told me it was actually very reasonable, that the papers were long, that she had over 120 of them to grade across all her sections, that I wouldn't want to do more than 1 a day either. No, I said. I wouldn't want to grade them. Honestly, I didn't want to write mine to begin with, but I did, the whole class did, and we met your deadline of 1 week. If you expect us to have due dates, shouldn't you have a reasonable turnaround time too? She went off about how long it takes, how much work goes into it, how I didn't understand the amount of effort involved. That one landed wrong, because I did, in fact, understand exactly how long the papers were. I had written one. So I told her that, and I told her that our history teacher, Mr. P, had returned a shorter essay in under 2 weeks. I told her that 2 months was not a reasonable comparison to 1 week, and I told her that if she found the grading unmanageable, she could assign less work or use class time more productively. She told me she didn't want to spend her whole evenings grading, and that's when I said it. If you don't want to grade in the evenings, you have plenty of time here in class. How many could you get done each day if you graded instead of shopping online? The room went completely quiet. Mrs. B stared at me. Then she told me loudly, with real offense, that she did not shop online during class, and how dare I suggest that. Here's the thing. Earlier that period, I had gotten up to grab a tissue, and on my way back, I had walked close enough to her desk to catch a clear view of her monitor. I looked her in the eye and said calmly, "Oh, really? Because I'm pretty sure if you opened your computer right now, it would be on American Eagle's website looking at jeans." Her entire body went rigid. The class was still silent. I could feel 20-something people holding their breath. Then she pointed at the door. "Out. Get out of this room right now and go straight to Mr. V's office. And here's where I need to stop and tell you something important." I had spoken up knowing exactly where this was going. I had done the math the moment I decided to push back. The principal, Mr. V, was not going to look kindly on a teacher who admitted to grading 1 paper per day 2 months after the due date, who had been browsing retail websites during class, and who had no answer for why 20-page essays assigned to 10th graders couldn't be returned before the school year ended. She had just handed me a direct line to his office, and she had done it herself. I smiled as wide as I possibly could. I picked up my things. I stood up, and I said, "Fine, I'm going to the office right now. Do you want to call ahead and let him know why I'm coming? Or should I just tell him when I get there?" I watched her face change. She had been so focused on removing me from the room that she hadn't thought one step ahead. She knew she was in the wrong. She knew I knew she was in the wrong. And she had just voluntarily sent me, with full permission, to tell the principal the whole story. She started backpedaling. Told me not to go to the office. Said I could wait in the hall until the bell rang. I told her no. "I talked back to you in class. I need to go to the office. That's the rule." And I walked out the door. I gave her a wave on the way. The look on her face told me everything. Mr. V heard the whole thing. He kept his expression professional. He was good at that. And when I finished, he told me that he would speak to Mrs. B and that I shouldn't speak to teachers that way. The bell rang. He sent me to my next class. He said almost nothing, but he didn't have to. Word had spread through my grade by the next morning. My friends who had Mrs. B in other periods were already watching to see what happened. What happened was this. The next day, Mrs. B handed out her usual busy work. But when she sat down at her desk, she did not open a shopping website. She pulled out a stack of essays and started grading. By the end of the week, a week that had previously been projected to stretch until after the last day of school, every essay in every one of her sections had been returned, graded, with feedback, 120 papers, done in 5 days. The same papers she had told us were so overwhelming that 1 per day was all she could manage. Funny how that works. And my grade? She had every reason to mark it down out of spite, and I had half expected her to. But I had written well enough that even a motivated grader looking for a reason to dock points couldn't find one. She gave me the A. Here's what I think about when I remember this story. She wasn't a bad person. She wasn't cruel. She was someone who had gotten comfortable with the idea that her side of the bargain didn't really have to be honored, that she could hold her students to strict deadlines while operating on whatever timeline she personally found convenient. And she had probably gotten away with it for long enough that the idea of being challenged genuinely hadn't occurred to her. What she miscalculated was the office. She used it as a threat, the way teachers sometimes do: step out of line, face consequences. What she forgot was that the principal's office requires you to explain why the student is there. And I was very, very prepared to explain. She sent herself to that meeting. I just showed up. There's a version of this where I stay quiet. The essays never get returned, and Mrs. B grades her one per day in total peace until summer. But there's something about being 15 and realizing that accountability doesn't automatically flow in one direction, that the same standards you hold students to should reasonably apply to the person setting them, that makes it very hard to stay quiet. I don't regret a word of it. And somewhere out there, 120 Shakespeare essays got graded in a week, proving, once and for all, that it was never actually that hard if this gave you flashbacks to every teacher who held you to a standard. They didn't hold themselves, smash that like button, and drop a comment. What's the boldest thing you ever said to a teacher and did it work? I want every story. And if you want more tales of people being held accountable in the most satisfying ways possible, subscribe. New story every week. See you in the next one.